Hey guys, Josh with ABG Tutorials, and in this video I'm going to walk you through a very basic card navigation layout. I use grid a couple times, I use flexbox, it has a header, a footer, I use media queries, and be sure to stay to the end because I even include some animations and transitions. All of these skills are highly transferable to all sorts of types of layouts, so be sure to like and subscribe and follow for more great content. So here's the layout that I made, and I understand it's not the nicest. That was not the purpose of this, okay? So I don't want anyone saying, oh, that looks like crap. You could easily customize these cards to make them look a lot nicer and adjust things. The purpose of this video is to show you guys some of the CSS, some of the styling. And so I want to show you that if I drag this up and down, you see that the footer actually follows my screen size. And that might be hard to do for some of you, and I'm going to show you how to do that. You can obviously see everything flexes around. When I shrink things, there's a flex box here, and then it does flow to the next line. I'm going to show you how to change some of these things. And then there's a media query here, where if you bring it to a small enough screen size, it'll switch to, a viewport. Something else that I've got is a transparent background that does not also make the content in front of it transparent. I'm going to walk you through some of the code here, things that I needed to learn, and also show you how playing around with some properties and stuff like that will change your pages. So the first thing I want to show you here is just how I've laid everything out. I've got a div with a class called main layout. And now I want to review the concept of children and a parent. So inside of this div, I've got children. This next div is a child of this one called main layout. And it's got a class of a header. So I've created it into three sections. A class of a header, a class for my main content, and then obviously at the bottom, I've got another class for my footer. And why I like this is because it'll always allow me to play around with the entire layout, but it'll also allow me to play around with the header separately, the main body content that you see separately, as well as the footer separately. So you'll notice on my main layout, I've got a min height of 100 VH or 100 DVH. My understanding is that DVH isn't always supported, so that you should use both. And what that does is that always will fill the layout to the screen size, the viewing port, okay? The other thing here is I've got it set up for a grid, and I've deleted this line of code because if I just leave it like this, I'm going to show you that I don't like how the header and the footer really resize way too big here. And so that's why adding something as easy as this, auto, 1FR auto, so that the header and the footer will just kind of auto resize, but everything else will take up the remaining area of the page. It just feels a lot nicer because then the body stays bigger, and yes, the header and the footer will resize a little bit, but not nearly as large as before. So the next thing I want to show you here is how I have this background image that's transparent. You can kind of see through it. This seems like it should be easier than it actually was, but if you try and change the body or try and change the CSS of your main layout, it'll actually change the opacity of everything. And that's not what we want. So that's why there's this section. It's kind of like a before selector where I can load up my image, and I've got two lines of code here. Again, it's just like a compatibility thing. So I can change my opacity this way, so if you wanted it to be a little bit more see-through, I'll change both of those. And then obviously I always have code here just changing around how things look. But if I refresh this, you'll notice that the background image just gets lighter, but nothing else does. Okay? And it seemed not easy to figure that out, because if you were to just go down to like your main layout and change the opacity, you're going to notice that everything changes. If you just want to play around with the background image, again, it doesn't work as much or as easy as you would think. So here, by using this, you can easily come in here, load up a background image, play around with the opacity, and it's not going to affect the remaining stuff on your page. When using display flex, remember that it will inherently flex around based on the children that are underneath a parent. Now I know that a lot of you won't like this, and I don't like it because it's set to wrap, okay? But the first concept of using flex is to just understand that it is going to inherently guess or kind of make a decision for me. So what I've got is all of my cards are acting as children under a new div here called card flex, or a class card flex. And then that allows me to put all of my cards as children to this div, so that each card will inherently flex around. And if I want to add a new card, it's really easy to do that. I want to show you this thing about the whole wrap thing. Maybe we don't like this. I don't. We can change the flex wrap to no wrap, and then it's going to just continuously shrink. And then you may need to set some min widths to continue. You know, maybe you don't like how these things add new lines. You can set min widths on these cards. But it'll keep shrinking, 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 shrinking. And then my media query kicks in right here. Okay, here's my media query where I've changed my cards to have a min height of 20 VH. That's what gets them to shrink a little bit. I set the min width to 400 pixels so that the card stays wide, just because I think that that'll look better. But obviously you'll play around with all of these. And I switch over to grid when that also happens. So that's what allows it right here to switch and stay wide and shrink down. You can play around with these. Now, that whole concept of wrapping your content using a flex, maybe you want to, maybe you don't. It's going to go back up and show you that you can change this to wrap. And again, if you play around with space around or space evenly, you might get a more desired look. This concept can be applied to all sorts of layouts. The concept of, do you want your content to wrap or not? And then what happens when you access this media query? Do you want things to shrink? Do you want this icon to disappear? Do you want to just have one keyword? You can play around with all of that. So I want to show you that each card has its own class. And then that way I can customize all of my cards with CSS to make them look the same. I should have added this image in CSS so that I only had to load it in once instead of copying and pasting. And remember the concept of parent and children here. So I've got a div class card and I've got 3 children, an H3, a paragraph, and then another div. This allows me to use grid once again to play around with the look. If I switch over here to my card, by using min widths and min heights with a grid or a flex, it really allows you to customize anything. I want to show you this grid template row thing again. Notice how I use the auto 1FR auto again. If I were to just change this to, let's say, auto, and let's load up, notice how my icons aren't always lined up on the bottom. It's auto, and then I could just tell it, you know, to take up the whole screen as well if I want, or to take up the whole card. But you'll notice that then sometimes all of a sudden it's pushing things too far down, or just this simple auto 1FR auto pushes things back higher, keeps my icons on the bottom, and it just gives me a cleaner look. It's very simple. The auto 1FR auto comes in handy as well, because remember, I have an H3 for a heading, I've got a paragraph for what I want to type, and then I've got a final div. So I can play around with this grid, and if I just go back to that simple concept of auto 1FR auto, it's going to give me this nice clean look where it pushes things to the bottom, where it's kind of acting like my footer, and I'm creating kind of a header concept with my H3. Now you can also play around with those min widths and stuff, and it really allows you to customize, because that's what I did right here with my header and my footer. And I'm scrolling here, remember, because I told it to wrap. That's why it's all of a sudden wrapping these cards, where that's not ideally what we would want to have happen. This auto, 1FR auto, remember on my main layout, can be paired with min heights to really customize. So you can see here on my footer, I've got a min height of 10 VH. I could change this to 15. And then when I refresh, you see my header, or sorry, my footer will push up. You don't like that? Well, let's go back to maybe 9. And then you'll notice that on the header, I have the same concept. It's a bigger min height. So maybe we want to change this to 12. But you want to change it according to the icon you're using. And then there, I don't really like the way that that looks either. That's why I decided to settle on the 15. And the auto, 1FR auto, is being used for my header and footer and body. It's also being used within my card. And so this concept can really be used in a lot of your layouts. By changing min heights paired with, the grid template rows, you can completely customize your page layout. Finally, let's look at this little animation where we've just got a box shadow. And you're going to notice here there's 4 values that need to be placed in here. The first value is the horizontal offset. The second value is going to be the vertical offset. The third value is going to be the blur radius. And the fourth value is the radius spread. So, if you want to play around with these, this would change the radius spread. Let's come back here and refresh. And you'll notice how everything got a little bit wider. So just by playing around with these, basic values, maybe you want this 5. So this would be a horizontal offset. And then it pushes things offset more. It's up to you what you want. But I like the idea of having something smaller. And I changed the color to blue just because it was easier to see. We could go back to something darker. And then this last value here is the opacity. So maybe you don't want it super dark, and then you want it to actually, when you hover, to get darker. So that's why you'll notice here I've got 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, and 2 to 4. And then, you could change this to be significantly lighter, let's say 0.5. Now you can barely see the shadow though, right? You can barely see it, but when you hover over it, you can really see it. So that's why you're going to have to play around a little bit. Maybe you want this to be 0.8. And then that way you can see the shadow a little bit better when you hover. But this is something you can add to buttons, to any sort of link, to any sort of tag, and it does really just make your page look a little bit nicer, and it's so easy to do. So again, here's the code for the box shadow, and then we add this hover selector so that when you do hover it, it'll actually change. And you can play around with, you can get crazy over here if you want. We can get this to be 12, and let's take a look at what that does when we actually hover and see how aggressive that is now. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know that learning grid, flexbox, just some of those little things that allow you to push things around, access min heights, min widths, media queries. I know that these skills can be applied to so many different things and so many different layouts. I've been very busy. I am probably only a couple months away from launching my own web development company. So I do plan on making more videos, but they're going to be tailored towards getting up and running your own company. So I'm going to be doing some WordPress designs, customizing CSS with WordPress, how the heck do you host websites, and some of these other things that I'm going to be marketing once I launch my business. Thanks again. As usual, always be grinding.